We believe that violence cannot end violence, and we do not want any more innocent lives lost in our name. We agree with Mahatma Gandhi's statement, "An eye for an eye makes the whole world blind." Peaceful Tomorrows promotes nonviolent actions in the pursuit of justice. In so doing, we hope to break the cycles of violence engendered by war and terrorism. We acknowledge our common experience with all people affected by violence throughout the world, and we work to create a safer and more peaceful world for everyone. Now, people sometimes ask us how the group got started. The founders of our group were a handful of brave and determined individuals who found each other because they spoke out in public right after the September 11th attacks. One member's press coverage was read about by another, and so on, as each joined the growing peace effort in the U.S. in response to those attacks. They connected through the internet, mutual introductions, word of mouth, and sometimes just chance encounters at peace events. Most of these founding members took part in a peace march from Washington, D.C. to New York City in late 2001. This march was entitled The Walk for Healing and Peace. After the march, several 9/11 victims' family members gathered to write a charter for an organization they wished to form. Here's a portion of what was scribbled on a napkin in a New York City pub that afternoon, expressed as rights. We are claiming our right to demand that alternatives to war be considered, explored, and enacted. We are claiming our right to reject revenge as a response to our deeply personal family tragedies. We are claiming our right to spare innocent families in Afghanistan and other nations from feeling the pain and loss that we have felt in our own families. We are claiming our right to express a common bond with other innocent victims of terrorism and tragedy all over the world without being labeled unpatriotic or un-American. Among our chief goals are to promote dialogue on alternatives to war while educating and raising the consciousness of the public on issues of war, peace, and the underlying causes of terrorism, to call attention to threats to civil liberties, human rights, and other freedoms in the U.S. as a consequence of war, and to encourage multilateral collaborative efforts to bring those responsible for the September 11, 2001 attacks to justice in accordance with the principles of international law. Early in our formation, Peaceful Tomorrows was fortunate to gain fiscal sponsorship from the Fellowship of Reconciliation, as Kathy mentioned, the largest and oldest interfaith peace organization in the United States. Although today our fiscal sponsorship is now with the Tides organization, we have continued a close relationship with the Fellowship of Reconciliation to this day. In January of 2002, 4 Peaceful Tomorrows members were part of the first U.S. civilian group to visit Afghanistan since the war in that country had started scarcely 9 weeks earlier. Family members wanted to see firsthand the effect of our invasion on the Afghan civilians. They visited the homes of many Afghanis who had lost loved ones as collateral damage from the war that our country had started in theirs. These were civilian families, and many of them had lost more than one family member. The Peaceful Tomorrows delegation was struck by how forgiving and sympathetic the Afghan families were to them. Most Afghanis they met lived in meager, partially destroyed housing, often with no electricity or running water. Yet they shared whatever they had with our delegation, even their scarce and precious food stores, and always tea. They saw and felt our sorrow, and even if they could not communicate this with words across the language barrier, through an interpreter they told us, "Our brother is your brother. Our pain is your pain." During that trip, family member and music teacher Daryl Bodley used his universal language skills in music to engage children at a school for orphans and street youth in Kabul. He had translated a simple children's counting song into Dari, the local version of Farsi spoken there. The children laughed and sang along, reinforcing the power of music to bridge emotional and cultural barriers. Surely this speaks to the universal human desire for harmony. The family members' visit proved to be a genuine catalyst for media coverage of Afghan civilians. The presence of Americans, particularly September 11th victims' family members, provided a human element that encouraged journalists to depict the plight of the Afghan people. Ultimately, we were able to put a human face on the cost of war and later sent 2 more delegations to Afghanistan. Peaceful Tomorrows has studied the situation in Afghanistan over the years and makes several policy suggestions, including that the U.S. should sign the treaty to ban cluster bombs, pay for cluster bomb and landmine cleanup in Afghanistan, and pledge never to use these weapons again. As Kathy said, Peaceful Tomorrows was formally launched in February of 2004. It was February 14th. The founders chose our name from this quote by Dr. Martin Luther King. The past is prophetic in that it asserts loudly that wars are poor chisels for carving out peaceful tomorrows. One day we must come to see that peace is not merely a distant goal that we seek, but a means by which we arrive at that goal. We must pursue peaceful ends through peaceful means. The founders read this statement at our inaugural event at the United Nations Church in New York City. We believe that people from all walks of life, artists, poets, musicians, teachers, everyone has something to offer as a response to our personal and national tragedies. And we invite everyone to come together and use our group as a rallying point, an opportunity to explore other alternatives to war. For we believe that peaceful tomorrows begin with what we do today. Hibakusha is a term that refers to people who have experienced atomic explosions. Peaceful Tomorrow's relationship with the Japanese Hibakusha is special. They were the first peace group to reach out to us and to travel to meet with us in New York City in April of 2002. We have shared a bond of directly experiencing the horrors humanity can inflict upon one another in the name of a political cause. Family member Kelly Campbell said of the 2002 Hibakusha visit, to meet people in their 70s and 80s who had suffered unimaginable loss more than 50 years ago, and to see their message was still needed today, made me realize that Peaceful Tomorrows was not a short-term commitment, but a lifelong journey. Last summer, I traveled to Japan to speak on behalf of Peaceful Tomorrows, and I also toured the Hiroshima Peace Memorial Park and met with 2 elderly Hibakusha. These men showed me where they lived in that city as young children on August 6, 1945, and they told me their stories. They implored me to speak out for peaceful conflict resolution. An estimated 25,000 Japanese Hibakusha are still alive today, but they die at the rate of 5,000 per year. So in approximately 5 years, these wise individuals will be lost to humanity forever. That is why it is so important to carry on their message. Our family members have spoken at many peace events in Japan over the years. In 2003, we joined Japanese Hibakusha and other peace activists as part of a peace boat delegation in New York City. Family member Ryan Amundsen said of his experiences on Peace Boat, throughout my life, I have been told that there can never be peace because people of different nations are so different. After meeting people from all over the world, I am certain of one thing. People everywhere are the same. It may sound naive, but not nearly as naive as believing the assertion that people are so radically different that we must accept violence as a way to solve conflict. It is so crucial for civil society to build bonds and work for peace. The Japanese Hibakusha, people injured over 60 years ago, but still actively fighting for justice and a nuclear-free world, continue to be a strong source of inspiration for our organization. Because our goal is nothing short of world peace, Peaceful Tomorrows has campaigned against the war in Iraq. We see the fate of Iraqi civilians as integrally tied to our own peace and security. Our experiences have taught us that the way to reduce the threat of repeated acts of terrorism, like those that claimed our relatives' lives, is not to bomb, invade, and occupy other nations, but to identify the root causes of violence and the abuse of human rights, and to support organizations expanding the capacity for settling grievances nonviolently. Despite the end of active U.S. fighting in Iraq, Peaceful Tomorrows feels that there is still much to be done to engender peace in that country. We have had the privilege to meet with and support local grassroots peace groups in Iraq. It may surprise you that any even exist, but since peace is a universal human goal, it makes perfect sense that they do. One of these is the Iraqi civil society organization, LAUMF. This means no violence in Arabic. And it's a network of Iraqi activists building a nonviolence movement to resist occupation, terrorism, and corruption in Iraq. This is their symbol on the left. In 2008, Peaceful Tomorrows members and staff traveled to Jordan and Iraq, where they were invited to meet with representatives of LAUMF to discuss mutual goals. We continue to be part of an international solidarity campaign supporting these courageous Iraqi activists working for nonviolence and human rights in one of the most war-torn parts of the world. Peaceful Tomorrows was one of the first groups to lobby Congress for an end to both the Afghanistan and Iraq wars, two conflicts that today an overwhelming number of Americans want to see ended. We frequently lobby Congress on a variety of issues. One of the most important things that Peaceful Tomorrows does is to partner with other like-minded organizations and international peace groups and collaborate whenever possible. This is important not only for the synergy that collaboration brings, but to recognize that we're all in this together. We are all one. As broadcaster Hugh Downs puts it, to say my fate is not tied to your fate is like saying your end of the boat is sinking. Stonewalk is a one-ton memorial stone inscribed unknown civilians killed in war that travels the world to serve as a reminder of the true cost of war. In September 2004, September 11th, Families for Peaceful Tomorrows sponsored Stonewalk from Boston to New York. And in 2005 and 2007, our members joined the Stonewalk privileges in Japan and Korea. Our organization has also teamed with the American Friends Service Committee, a 93-year-old religious organization, you may know them as the Quakers, that was founded on the principles of nonviolence to establish exhibits all over the U.S. called Eyes Wide Open. These exhibits are enormous displays of empty boots of soldiers and empty shoes of civilians, calling to mind the enormous human loss from war. In 2005, a half dozen family members traveled to Oklahoma City to join other victims of international violence for the 10-year commemoration of the Oklahoma City bombing. This is a Forgiveness Project sponsored event, and it included a workshop called Beyond Retribution, which was moderated by Father Michael Lapsley, a South African priest who lost both hands and an eye to a letter bomb due to his anti-apartheid efforts. A DVD of the workshop can be found on our website. On September 11, 2006, Peaceful Tomorrows sponsored a conference called Civilian Casualties, Civilian Solutions. This groundbreaking international symposium featured 30 terror victims from more than 18 countries who have created organizations to encourage peaceful conflict resolution. The conference marked the creation of a new network of peace organizations, a broad affiliation of worldwide peace groups that promote justice, reconciliation, and long-lasting unity called the International Network for Peace. Peaceful Tomorrows has been honored with the 2002 Pax Christi National Peacemaker Award, the 2003 Miranda Peace Award, and 2 Nobel Peace Prize nominations in 2003 and 2004. Our individual members have been acknowledged several times. Last year, Peaceful Tomorrows received a private donation that allowed us to step up our campaign for closing the prison at Guantanamo Bay. We view closure of that prison as crucial to reestablishing U.S. credibility on the rule of law after significant reversals in the past decade. As long as the prison is open, the perception of human rights violations it represents continues, whether they are taking place or not. Peaceful Tomorrow's members have spoken out at rallies in Washington, D.C., New York, and Boston, explaining why the Guantanamo detentions and military tribunals are incompatible with a search for justice. Family member Valerie Lutnikowska said at the Witness Against Torture rally in Washington, D.C., "I want 2 things, justice and safety. Guantanamo and the use of torture itself have not served to make us safer. These practices have disgusted people all over the world and turned them away from us. Worse, they have energized deep-seated resentments and created new dangers." In March of 2010, our organization produced a video letter to Obama that received widespread exposure on the internet via YouTube. The letter was read by family member Donna O'Connor, and it urged continued action to close the Guantanamo Bay prison camp. In addition to closing the prison, we are suggesting justice and fairness for all detainees by halting the use of military tribunals in favor of more transparent trial system, transferring those charged to the U.S. criminal system, and trying the detainees in federal court. By doing these things, President Obama will keep his campaign promise to close the prison at Guantanamo Bay. The U.S. will begin to regain credibility with the world, and there will be an end to what has become a symbol of our country's most notorious, our country's most notorious human rights violations. Of equal importance to Peaceful Tomorrows is to prepare for the 10th commemoration of September 11th later this year. We are working on several educational projects. First, we are gathering stories from survivors of violence for our website, 911stories.org. This website is accessible from our main website, which is peacefultomorrows.org. Eventually, we will have some lesson plans there as well. The educational group Facing History and Ourselves plans to review our site and encourage their educators to use portions for their widely used curriculum, particularly that on current history. Their website is facinghistory.org. Second, we are collaborating with the Voices for Education project. You may know of this because it's a Tucson-based organization that distributes inspiring stories of peace leaders to educators across the country. They get 20,000 visitors per month to their website, where they plan to profile our members each day in August of 2011. They also plan to include our messages and requests in their newsletter, which reaches 77,000 educators. A final educational effort we are involved in will be editing a newsletter called The Change Agent. This is an adult education newspaper for social justice, which is read by educators and their students. And these are people who often come from countries in which they have experienced political violence and are unfamiliar with the American system of the rule of law and may be facing increased discrimination here in the U.S. as foreigners after 9/11. For that effort, we are working with a group called World Education. Now, this newsletter comes out in March and September, and I just got notice today that there was a call for articles about people with stories about September 11th for their 33rd issue, which is the one that's scheduled to come out in September. So if you're interested, visit their website. Just as the nature of our work has evolved over the past decade, so has our active membership shifted in tune with the rhythms of our personal lives. Today, Peaceful Tomorrow's most active members are mostly a different group than those who started the organization. but we remain dedicated to our mission. We are, as our membership chairperson Loretta Filipov puts it, the best friends we never wanted to meet. Our core group now consists of 200 family members living in 31 states and 7 foreign countries. We have thousands of supporters on our mailing list. And there's a slideshow, which was running earlier, and it's still running by the registration table if you'd like to have a more personal look at our members. So now that I've told you something about our organization, I'd like to share a little bit more with you about my personal journey through all this. In the days and weeks after September 11, 2001, I worried about the effect of that day on my widowed brother, and not on the whole country. I naively assumed that our nation would deal with the events in a rational, responsible way, while 9/11 families would be allowed the space to recover privately. But neither idea would come true. Within a year, it was clear that this so-called war on terror was quickly morphing into a second U.S. war in the Middle East. I was sickened by this prospect. En route to a Girl Scout event, I was horrified to hear the 10-year-old members of my Brownie troop discussing where their families planned to hide if Saddam Hussein dropped a bomb on their houses. Now, my community is in rural northeastern Nebraska. Actually, southeastern Nebraska. In rural southeastern Nebraska. And this is a place where our largest population center, which is the county seat, is a town of 4,000 people. So we're squarely in the middle of our country. And as far from international significance as one can imagine. Yet the fear was there, and sadly that fear was as real to those children as it apparently was to their parents, thanks to those who made it so in the federal government and national media. So I knew that something was going horribly wrong in my country. One morning in early 2004, I woke up and realized that all the negative fallout from September 11th wasn't going to end unless people did something to change things. And I knew that no matter how much I didn't want it to, it meant me. I had to make a change. I had an obligation to act. I had to be an example for my own children, lest they too become disturbed, complacent, and disillusioned, or worse, merely fearful and ill-informed, like their classmates. So I set about doing things I had never done before. I volunteered at a campaign office. I worked precincts in a neighborhood I wouldn't dare even drive through before. I organized and worked a tabling at a college I had never seen in another state. I placed signs and mailed letters and started an email network. I even called strangers all over the nation in advance of the presidential primaries. Within a few months, my husband and I became the county leaders of our political party. We, who had just moved from out of state, we didn't even live in a town, we didn't attend a local church, we didn't work locally, and we didn't really even know anyone. Suddenly we were leaders in our community and in our red state, not very popular ones. I stumbled across September 11th Families for Peaceful Tomorrows on the internet. And I remember thinking that the group just felt right, and I was desperate to connect with people whose ability to reason had not been usurped by ginned-up nationalized hysteria. I wanted to speak out to stop this madness, and so I signed up for their Speakers Bureau. Our family met other Peaceful Tomorrows members at an anti-war march in Washington, D.C. in September 2004. Weeks later, I joined 4 Peaceful Tomorrows members to lobby Congress for an end to the Iraq War and in favor of changes to the misnamed USA Patriot Act. Working side by side with these strong and intelligent women cemented my commitment to our organization. I also put bumper stickers on my car, something I had never done in my life, and signs in our yard. These signs read, "War is not pro-life." I come from a very rabidly pro-life area. Also, they said, "Islam is not the enemy," and "Support our troops, bring them home." George W. Bush's re-election sent many people across the country into depression, myself included. I told my friends I had a bad case of what I called the red state blues. I posted the flag on our flagpole at half-mast in mourning for our democracy. My husband and I took our daughters out of school to protest the 2005 inauguration in person, and it was written up in the local newspaper. During our visit to D.C., our family assisted the American Friends Service Committee in setting up an Eyes Wide Open exhibit in that city. This is a picture of my daughter, about 8 years old, setting up some of the booths in a church. Later, I represented Peaceful Tomorrows as a co-sponsor for the first Eyes Wide Open exhibit ever in Omaha, Nebraska. And I began tabling for Peaceful Tomorrows at every peace event I could find. I responded to a Peaceful Tomorrows request to speak at a September 11, 2005 March and Rally for Peace in Texas. I flew to Austin on the strength of a promise from a stranger in an email, kind of like I did this time too, Aaron. And we marched 4 miles in the rain, and I delivered an impassioned speech calling the president and his administration terrorists. Because, after all, preemptive war is terrorism.
That's right.
And I did this as I stood on the steps of the Capitol of the U.S. President's home state. Now, I know that doesn't sound very remarkable now, and it wouldn't have been remarkable before 2011, but during the Bush years, giving that speech was a very, very audacious thing to do. I recall thinking that someday my husband and I would tell our children about that dark and shameful period in American history when people were arrested for wearing anti-party of power t-shirts. And those who spoke out against the government were herded into free speech zones. You guys remember that?
Yes, we do.
I know I've been in one. So I felt I owed it to my children to stand up against the injustice. I spoke out again for peace and humanity in Texas on behalf of Peaceful Tomorrows on September 11, 2006, this time as a guest of the San Antonio Peace Center. Again, the experience revitalized and sustained me while I lived in the heart of an America I no longer recognized. I also began receiving hate mail on my home and my car. And the next time I tried to open a local bank account, I was rejected because my name matched that of a person of interest by the federal government. Disconcerting as this was, it meant I was having an effect. And besides, I have enjoyed many personal benefits from this work, and I'm going to be telling you about those because I hope to inspire you too to act. And perhaps you'll find that you will enjoy some of these benefits as well. For one thing, I've learned more about domestic and foreign cultures, history, religion, science, geography, and government than I ever thought I cared to know. This has improved my understanding of world events, my conversational skills, and even my ability to help my children with their homework. I've made so many new friends. Back at the turn of the century, when my husband and I moved to Nebraska, the U.S. states weren't defined as red or blue. You guys remember those days before we were so divisive? We didn't think that making friends of like political minds would really matter that much. But now I know how terribly important it is to interact daily with people who care about such things as preserving our democracy. I have dozens of new friends who make all the difference to me between physical and social isolation and personal connectedness. I may never have found these people in my state under other conditions, and I have to say, it is really nice to have something good to thank George Bush for a change. I've also acquired a renewed sense of patriotism. I never knew how intensely protective of our democracy I was until I was faced with a systematic effort to dismantle it under the guise of security. And I've learned a very important lesson, that action is the best antidote to despair. As my friend Steve says, action gets us out beyond ourselves. The pain can be enormous and even be more than we think we can bear. But when we use it to connect ourselves with the world beyond us, it gives a grander meaning. that helps us with personal healing and wakens us to the fact that we are not isolated. We are a part of something huge, a world society. And that larger self needs healing too. My children have been affected in positive ways too. I'm happy to observe that my daughters clearly know more about American government and world events than all their classmates combined. They would not have gotten this knowledge had they not been exposed to many dinner table discussions, meetings, marches, family trips. The Bill of Rights hangs over our breakfast table, and they regularly get quizzed on it. My children are also now more sophisticated consumers of the media. They are deeper thinkers and more questioning individuals than they would have otherwise been. My rural Midwestern community is peopled primarily of descendants of whites-only cultures from Eastern Europe. People of color in my home state are rare, and sadly, not especially welcome. As a result, our local children are growing up with little experience and less understanding of what it means to be a world citizen today. So in 2005, I started a 3-day tolerance education workshop that I provide to the 6th grade social studies class at the local middle school. We discuss how wrong it is to judge people by their religion or race. At the end of that class, I show a photo of fellow Peaceful Tomorrow's member Talat Hamdani's son. His name is Salman Hamdani, the photo of him. And I ask the students who they think he is. Now when I show that photo, I have it zoomed in so you cannot see the badges above his head. And I always do this at the end of the class. Almost all the students, seeing the dark-skinned Middle Eastern face, say he's a 9/11 terrorist. When I revealed to them that Salman was a U.S. citizen and a New York City police cadet killed in the act of saving 9/11 victims and a Muslim American at that, we all realized that the U.S. has a long way to go toward practicing the lessons we think we already know. You know, when I first started teaching the class in 2005, my students were 8 years old on September 11, 2001. This year, my students will have been 2 years old on that day. So I really want you to think about how long stereotypes last and where they come from, and what role we adults play in preserving wrong assumptions simply by not challenging them. Some of those wrong assumptions are built into the USA Patriot Act, which is seriously lacking in checks and balances regarding security versus civil liberties. Today, this act continues to contain broad, invasive powers by the federal government to conduct costly investigations into our private lives, which only adds hay to the terrorist search haystack. Ironically, our government has acknowledged that too much hay in the haystack was one of the biggest problems in predicting the 9/11 attacks. Many people have already forgotten about the USA Patriot Act because it no longer is in the news cycle, until recently when it came up for reauthorization again, which is a good thing that it has, because now people are talking about it again. We at Peaceful Tomorrows continue to be concerned that even if one administration doesn't use or misuse the Patriot Act powers, until this act is revised, another can and might. Currently, Oregon Senator Ron Wyden, who is a senior member of the Senate Intelligence Committee, is working on some very appropriate changes to the Patriot Act, which could be incorporated into the May 27th reauthorization bill. So I urge you to check into his work, and I had some information about it at the table, at my table out there, outside, if you're interested. You know, the furor about the Muslim Community Center known as Park 51 in Lower Manhattan is another example of civil rights at risk in the name of September 11th. Our group has been very outspoken about our support of this center. Perhaps you've seen some of our appearances on Countdown with Keith Olbermann or CNN. An interesting thing about this controversy is that when all the Islamophobia erupted last summer, I was touring the city of Hiroshima in Japan. Our guide took us to see a plaque mounted on the side of a downtown building. The plaque plaque commemorated 5 American soldiers who were killed by the atomic bomb in 1945. These soldiers, whom today would be euphemistically referred to as victims of friendly fire, had been housed at the Hiroshima police station as prisoners of war. And I don't know if you could read this plaque very well, so I put the words down here. It says, U.S. Air Force and Navy airmen interned as POWs at the Chugoko Military Police Headquarters, which was located at this site near the epicenter, were among the victims of this Holocaust. This plaque is placed in memory of those brave and honorable men. May this humble memorial be a perpetual reminder of the savagery of war. I found it remarkable, frankly, that U.S. soldiers would be given a memorial at a site where the U.S. government summarily slaughtered 300,000 Japanese. And yet, we Americans make so much noise about a constitutionally justified community center that is near, not on, our ground zero, which is the site of just under 3,000 deaths. Imagine the controversy that would erupt if we even considered honoring the 30-plus Muslim Americans like Salman Hamdani, who died at the World Trade Center, with so much as a small plaque nearby. It's also worth noting that more than 90 countries, nearly half of the nations in the world, lost citizens on September 11, 2001. So I hope that our media this year will remember to recognize the diversity of religious preferences and nationalities of all those lost on that day. Acknowledging this takes nothing away from our national pride. It only adds to it. And I sincerely hope that it will not take us the 43 years it took the Japanese to erect a plaque like this. Moreover, we dare not forget that the threat of nuclear weapons is still very real in this world. Many organizations exist to combat this, including one called the Never Again Campaign, which is an all-volunteer, people-to-people program that brings English-speaking Japanese citizens to the U.S. The Never Again Campaign volunteers come to the United States on their own money, and they stay in private homes. They speak for free to any age group of any size, and their goal is to share the Japanese culture to promote international understanding. These people are highly educated in the history of the atomic bomb, and they are tasked with sharing the message of the Japanese hibakusha, or A-bomb survivors, a message which is never again Hiroshima, never again Nagasaki, and never again Pearl Harbor. I'm one of several Peaceful Tomorrow's members who are hosting a Never Again volunteer, and I strongly urge you to consider doing so. There is, again, more information about this organization at the table outside. Excuse me. French writer Louis Lecointe said, "If it were proved to me that in making war, my ideal had a chance of being realized, I would still say no to war. For one does not create a human society on mounds of corpses." Each action I take renews my commitment to the cause of peace at every societal level, locally, nationally, and internationally. It is a legacy I hope to leave not only on behalf of my sister-in-law and the child she never had, but to my own children and to the millions of children who will be, but whom none of us will ever meet. So today, I'm asking you to act too. Many things you know you can do. You know to contact your congressional representatives on issues that matter. You know that you must vote for our democracy to work. You know that not only must you always vote, but you must get others to do so as well. And of course you know, just like those passengers who voted on Flight 93, that more than ever, your lives and the lives of your children really do depend on the outcome of your vote. And speaking of voting, if a concern for free and fair elections sparks your interest, please work on that, because it's, by all means, it has not been resolved by any means. You also know that engaging in political debate is important, but in fact, it's an obligation. Particularly now when we know that the media has been, well, let's just say, not always a reliable source of fairness and balance. To paraphrase Gandhi, we must be the media we want to see in the United States. So speak out about world affairs. You owe it to your fellow Americans to enlighten them. Plato said, 2,000 years ago, one of the penalties for refusing to participate in politics is that you end up being governed by your inferiors. He also said, the price good men pay for indifference to public affairs is to be ruled by evil men. We cannot afford to be complacent, or too busy, or too concerned about what others might think if we dare to interject some balancing perspective into a discussion. We must act as if the change we desire depends on it, because it does. You can also put signs in your yard, on your person, and even on your cars. Make your opinion heard. It's important. You can wear buttons, like I do. These simple buttons that say things like this one. It says, think, it's patriotic. Buttons start conversations. I have met many now good friends in my buttons and bumper stickers and yard signs. One of the most powerful things you can do is write letters to the editor. And you can send these to all kinds of newspapers, not just local ones. You know, even out-of-state and nationally circulated papers print your letter. In fact, many big newspapers are very interested and prefer letters from the South and the Midwest. A letter from an everyday citizen, which would be you and I, has 6 times the influence as a statement by a public official. 6 times. So you guys go out and use your influence. There's an excellent website called rethinkingschools.org, which has developed an easy-to-use tool to teach children both the power and technique of writing letters to the editor and the humble but potent habit of developing empathy. They suggest assigning students to write a letter to the editor from the point of view of a September 11th family member who prefers peace over retribution. This is a very simple and effective win-win exercise that could be easily incorporated into a writing, history, or social sciences class. Unfortunately, every time we witness an outrage in our world, we must respond. Otherwise, we risk tacit endorsement of it, and then more follows. One example of this is when this sign was posted outside a local liquor store in a town near me, and it says, "Pray for our president, Psalm 109:8. As soon as I saw that sign, I knew what it meant. Psalm 109:8 refers to the imprecatory biblical prayer that his days be few and let another take his office. The very next line in that prayer is, let his children be fatherless and his wife a widow. The quote cannot be separated from the biblical context. It is a pro-death message. I thought that was very ironic in my rabidly pro-life home state. Unfortunately, this isn't an isolated incident. Psalm 109:8 has been appearing all over the U.S. as a call to action, prayerful action, but action nonetheless to bring about our president's demise. Now, I should note that this is completely within anyone's free speech right to display a sign like this. The ACLU would in fact defend this proprietor's right to do so, just as it would defend his right to carry a gun, which he does. That's because the ACLU's brand of conservatism, the conservation of the Constitution, is politically and religiously blind, even if that liquor store owner's is not. As my friend Tim says, I'm all for free speech. Otherwise, how are we going to know who the idiots are? Since my home is in the Bible Belt, I felt that all serious Christians should have been appalled by this sign. So I decided to write a letter to the editor to inform them. In the letter I said, Whether or not one likes, tolerates, or blatantly disapproves of the direction President Obama is taking this country, to wish anything sinister on him is an even worse direction to be heading. Moreover, to invoke sacred texts in calling others to wish death upon a fellow human is religious fanaticism, plain and simple. This is exactly the same technique used by the 9/11 terrorists. At minimum, we should boycott any establishment that would ask us to conspire with God to kill the leader of our country. I should add that this man considers himself extremely patriotic. He's always wearing patriotic t-shirts. The day after my letter appeared in the local paper, the liquor store sign was revised. The new sign said, and I'm not making this up, "Come in for free samples." The story brings to mind the quote, "Anyone who thinks that they are too small to have an effect has never been in the dark with a mosquito." So just remember, we all have the right to remain silent, but we also have the right not to remain silent. Albert Einstein said, "The world is a dangerous place, not because of those who do evil, but because of those who look on and do nothing." Another thing you can do is post your flag at half-mast, upside down, or both. When my husband and I displayed our flag this way, concerned citizens of the nearby town of 600 began discussing what to do about this apparent act of anti-patriotism. They eventually sent out the town's single policeman to discuss it with us. Now, as I said earlier, our flag was at half-mast in mourning for our country after the 2004 election. And in 2005, my husband turned the flag upside down because he was deeply disturbed by the suspension of habeas corpus at that time. Now, as many of you probably know, an upside-down flag is an international symbol displayed by ocean-going vessels when they are in distress. And some of the U.S. military uses it as a symbol of our nation in distress, as shown here. So the policeman, my fellow Americans, came to my home, drove into my driveway, but he didn't leave his car. He leaned out his window and he said, "Do you know that your flag is upside down at half-mast?" I said, "I certainly do." And he said, "So that's the way you want it?" And I said, "Yes." And I explained that it was a political statement, and I explained why. And I added that my husband and I were exercising our constitutionally protected freedom of speech in this way. The officer said, "Oh, okay, I just thought that maybe some of your friends had done that to play a joke on you." I replied to him, "Oh yeah, those crazy friends of mine." "Well, it's no joke, officer. We're just U.S. citizens stating our views on our own personal property." So he said, "Okay then, have a nice day," and he drove away. Later I was asked by a local military veteran why we posted our flag that day. When I told him, he asked me, "What's habeas corpus?" I was pretty surprised that someone who was willing to put his life on the line for our freedoms wasn't aware of this basic human right enshrined in our laws. So I explained it to him. So I had an opportunity to inform two people. If I hadn't posted our flag that way, these teachable moments might never have happened. So I say to you, take a chance. Make people ask questions and help them become informed. You can also offer to make a peace presentation at your child's school or social clubs. One day I happened to rent a movie called Paperclips. This is a great documentary about the power of teaching tolerance to children. And it's now available free online, so I highly recommend you check it out. I was struck by the similarities between the small town depicted in that movie and the one near where I live, and I was so moved by the film that I purchased an extra copy and the book, and I took them to the local public school, and I found a social studies teacher who would show it in class. Well, that 6th grade class and I had a good discussion about diversity and tolerance, but I'll never forget the boy who came up to me at the end. This child told me he planned to enlist in the Army when he graduated, so he could go to Iraq. He said, I want to do this so I can spread the word about tolerance and diversity and help stop all the fighting over there. I was pretty amazed. Here's a 12-year-old child in what would have otherwise been a typical boring day in social studies class, captivated by the idealistic notion that he could make a difference in the world. Moreover, this precocious student unquestionably expected the U.S. to be in Iraq for at least 6 more years. He was 12 years old. He thought, well, we'll still be there when I graduate. Sadly, his assumption about our occupation of Iraq has turned out to be true. But I sincerely hope he has not lost the sense of empowerment he gained that day. My brother Mark told me, if we want peaceful tomorrows, it means that we have to be better world citizens, better in understanding and respecting the rights of other cultures and nations. In civics class, they taught us how to be good citizens of our own country. It's time to expand our teaching of good citizenry to include being a good citizen in the rest of the world. So, go out and help children learn to become good citizens of the world. Since this is a teach-in, I'm going to make the statement that professional teachers are perhaps some of the most powerful people on the planet because they have an opportunity every day to plant a seed. Now, of course, their power is not immediate nor overt. It is subtle and long-term, but therefore more permanent. A teacher's power comes with responsibility to stick to the facts, and in this country, not to espouse religious viewpoints. But teachers can ask questions and use personal stories to stimulate empathy and reasoning, and best of all, to change the future. So whether you are formally or informally teaching, as I am, you can promote unity in important ways. In the very young, you can pay attention to what they say and how they play and how they're taught in school, at home, and in religion class. You can also offer to do a demonstration at school culture or history events. Middle and high school are perfect environments to inform students about Hiroshima, Nagasaki, the Holocaust, and now September 11th. Or you can find and promote speakers or videos from cultures little known to local students. You can also offer to lead a discussion to find out what students know or think they know about September 11th and challenge those beliefs with facts if necessary. You might be surprised at how ill-informed today's children are of our own recent history. Even with adults and the elderly, you can create a context in which they may become receptive to unifying concepts. I have found that by keying on their religious beliefs, you can create a shared vision with them for the world that they will leave to their descendants. You can also use knowledge of their history compared to what's happening today to start a discussion. I have found that all adults, regardless of background, will readily agree that we must learn from history. There are many other ways you can positively affect the local educational environment. You can serve on a school board or purchase and donate books, videos, or magazine subscriptions to libraries and schools. You can host an international visitor like a foreign exchange student or a NAC volunteer and get them out talking at local civic organizations and clubs like Kiwanis, Rotary, 4-H. And of course you can frequently and should model simple world citizen behaviors like being friendly to strangers and picking up litter even if you didn't drop it. Another slightly more wily way to help inform others offers itself whenever you have to spend time waiting for something. Many waiting areas, whether it's a doctor's office or the local tire store, have a television playing. I always try to note if others in the area are watching the TV and change the channel if it happens to be on a less than edifying station. I also bring along magazines or newsletters to leave behind in waiting areas. These are usually from organizations that are dedicated to promoting knowledge of things with just a bit more gravitas than how to make a nice-looking Easter cake or how to lose 5 pounds in 5 weeks. I also share my periodicals in this way in airports when I travel. Got a few to drop off at Sky Harbor. And I remind myself that even if someone picks it up to recycle it, they will probably glance at the cover and read a few words on it. And so, at minimum, they will become aware that such a publication, and therefore such thinking, exists in the world. You might also consider becoming a member or a more active member in a progressive change organization of your choice. Whatever you choose to do is fine. Just find your own way, own gentle way to shake the world, as Gandhi would say. Here's a quote from Edward Everett Hale. I am only one, but still I am one. I cannot do everything, but still I can do something. And just because I cannot do everything, I will not refuse to do the something that I can do. I'm going to share with you a quote by my little brother Jack, because his great personal loss is what ultimately brought me here today. He was asked by a reporter whether he thought our government had made life safer for us since September 11th. His reply was, "The Constitution of the U.S. begins with the words, 'we the people,' not 'we the government,' meaning that we the people are the only ones who can make our lives safe, whether by voting in competent, nonpartisan representatives and presidents, or by taking more direct action. Action, just like the passengers and crew did on Flight 93. So I challenge you this year, 10 years after September 11th, to commemorate the sacrifice of the September 11th victims by acting to create peace and justice in the world. The members of our organization are committed to taking our message of turning our grief into action for peace to ever wider audiences. And you can help us by visiting our website, signing up to help with our many campaigns. I see that some people already signed up at the table, and I really appreciate that. In the words of Mahatma Gandhi, nonviolence is the greatest force that humanity has been endowed with. So I believe that if we resolve to marshal that force as a people, we can form more peaceful tomorrows. I'm going to close with this beautiful quote by author Kobi Yamada. Believe that there is a light at the end of the tunnel. And believe that you might be that light for someone else. Thank you. So I guess it's time to take questions. Anyone? Are there any questions? Yeah?
I really appreciate your taking the time to make your presentation.
Thank you.
I'm from Nebraska, I'm from Oklahoma,
Oh, okay.
so there's some similarities.
Yeah.
Football and no proteins and things like that. I had a question. Did you ever reach out to the Saudi families?
The Saudi families?
No,
You mean the families of the perpetrators?
Yeah, sorry, what's on.
You know, we don't necessarily know who those people are or have access to them. So I would just have to say no, but we would if we didn't know who they were. And I think that's a good idea.
Have you been denied access or tried to get access?
No, we haven't actually. I mean, I have to admit, that's the first time I've ever heard of it as an idea, and I've been involved with the group for about 6 years. So I'll bring it up. I'll see if we can find them. I think it would be difficult, but it's a very interesting proposition, and I appreciate that. I noticed that, you know, you had the violence down in Tucson, and there were some families, victim family members, who reached out to the family of the young man who did the shooting, and I thought that was really encouraging. So I think that's a great model. Yeah, good idea. Any other questions?
I'd like to ask, have you ever wondered what really happened on 9/11? I mean, what really happened to those people that were in those planes? Or are you just buying the official theory?
You know, our group is comprised of a lot of people with a lot of different ideas about what really happened. And we do not, as an organization, seek to debunk any official theories or, you know, try to make that an issue. What we do is we'd like to find justice. And we'd like to know the truth. I mean, we were involved in forming the 9/11 Commission, but it's such a knotty issue and such a difficult issue and so not part of our organizational goals. We set that aside and we just say, you know, we want justice, it's part of our organizational goals, but we also want no war, and we also want no more violence, and we also want no one else to suffer as we did. So we do not take a stance in that way as an organization. So, any other questions?
We have to go, but we want to say thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for coming. Okay, Kathy?
Can you speak a little bit about the resistance of the group encountered, particularly in those initial media appearances?
Yeah, you know, like I said, I joined around 2004, 2005, and I wasn't directly involved in that. And I know you've read our book. I have a sample of our book on our table, and you can read more about that. But my understanding is there was a lot of flack. Of course, we were considered unpatriotic. I know I've been accused by even members of my own family. What do you want to do? Go hug, you know, these people who attacked us? I mean, there's a lot of negative attitude. Even right now, I was asked to speak at the Kiwanis Club in Lincoln, Kiwanis Club in Lincoln, about our organization. And after I did, a member of our group says, why don't you give that presentation to our Kiwanis Club in town near where I live, the Kiwanis Club I'm involved in. And I said, well, no one's ever asked me, and you know, I'd be glad to. So when they called me up and said to do this, I said, I just want you to know that, you know, this can have some, what I say, people view as political, and they can have some pretty gut reactions. So I do not want to appear as someone who's just going to, you know, make everybody angry. I'm there to share what our group's message is, and they don't have to agree with it, but, you know, they don't typically want political speakers in there. So I just wanted to preface that, because when you live among people, as I do, who, you know, I have to say this, essentially they believe that if you are Muslim, you're a terrorist, and you just, you know, should be kicked out of our country or something. They have such a negative view that it's really difficult to speak in front of people like that. So I try to, you know, like I said, try to go with what's similar about us. And there's an awful lot that's similar about, for example, in my area, which is very heavily evangelical Christian, between our religions, the religions of people in our area, and the Muslim faith. But they don't know this. You know, they kind of go with what the media tells them. And unfortunately, it's not always very good. I was struck by a friend of mine. She lives in a little town in Nebraska, and she says, Nancy, our Bible study group, and she goes to evangelical church, we're studying sacred texts from other religions. And last weekend, we studied Islam. And I thought, uh-oh, here she comes. And she said, you know, those people are not terrible. I just was, you know, really gratified by that statement. She said, those people are peaceful, and that religion has so much in common with Christianity. You know, they don't want to kill people. Boy, that is not at all what we hear on the news. And I was so grateful to hear that, and so inspired to know that at least in that little corner of the Bible Belt, in that one community, in that one church, they were taking a little broader approach to cultural understanding and listening and thinking. I mean, the fact that they were willing to study the Quran at all or to study Islam at all was enormous. So, yeah, we get resistance, but I try to, you know, relay those stories. That all you have to do is just look at another person, talk to another person, get to know other people, and you'll find out that they're really not that much different. It doesn't matter how they dress. It doesn't matter what kind of church they go to. So the kind of resistance that we can get, we just try to overcome it with those kinds of things. Because there's so many more things that unify us than divide us, really. Anybody else?
I was very interested in your work with schools and have long used resources like Rethinking Schools
Yeah.
and do anti-racist and anti-oppression kinds of activities with young people. I just wonder if you could talk a little bit more about how receptive local districts have been, or any issues in getting in, and then if there are any stories about what children have then done on their own. You started to go there with the story
Yeah.
about the young man who wanted to go to Iraq to make peace someday, if I understood the story well. But
Yeah.
if you could say a little bit more about your experiences getting into schools and working with young people, young activists.
Yeah, you know, I wish I had more to share about that. I have approached this school system where my children go to school.
Okay.
And because I had ins there, you know, I knew the teachers there.
Right.
And so I've been able to connect with one teacher who, you know, agreed that it was important to teach tolerance and diversity. And he keyed into the paper clips program. You know, so what I did was I started with this video, which is so moving. Have you seen it? It's incredible. It's hard not to get choked up watching that. And I had him watch it. And once he watched it, he said, yeah, we learned about the Holocaust in 6th grade. You know, I would love for you to come in and do an extension with our group. So that was great. But a lot of that tends to depend more on the individual than the school district. I never approached the school board or the principal. I went
Teacher level,
directly
yeah.
to a teacher. And basically, I didn't even go to that teacher. I went to the guidance counselor in the school, because the guidance counselor is tasked with, you know, eliminating bullying and eliminating intolerance in the schools. And so, you know, she was always on the lookout for teaching tools. And I thought she would be the one who would respond. But she watched the video, and then she was the one who shared it with that teacher, because she knew he would be receptive, and she knew he taught about the Holocaust at that level. So that's how I was able to do that. But like I said, it really depends on a teacher, and unfortunately, you just got to find a receptive individual and try to work with that. Because I've talked to other schools, like, ironically, I went to the Catholic school in that town and tried the same thing, and it didn't get very far. So, you know, I probably need to expand my network of contacts to people who have an in at that school, because that's really only, it's personal stuff. It's personal connectedness. Once you know this person, especially in small towns, you know this person, they trust you, you know, you have a personal connection, they're more apt to be receptive. And that's kind of how it works out. And that, you know, like I said, the guidance counselor was my contact in the first place. I haven't been able to get into any other schools with it. Admittedly, I haven't really been able to have time to do that, too. So, you know, it would be a hit and miss thing, but I encourage you to try it. I mean, I bought this video and this book and whatever else I could find, and just gave it to the school and hoped, well, you know, if that's all I do, that's something. But it got a little farther, and so that was really good. And I look forward to doing it every year. It's really kind of fun.
I'm wondering what you would think of as maybe the most unique or surprising groups you've talked to, and what range of types of groups you've talked to.
Well, I guess I would say that when I went to Japan, that was really interesting, because the peace groups I've talked to are usually, you know, people like yourself, who are like the choir, right? You're usually pretty receptive, and the people who invited me to Texas those 2 different times, they, you know, were already receptive to my message, because they were peace groups. But in Japan, I was just surprised that to find that they have very active peace groups in Japan. I was really impressed by this. The man who sponsored our visit there, he paid for my colleague and I to come over and speak to a university. It was a Christian girls' school in Japan where we spoke. And he had a concert, he had a benefit concert for us. And this is a guy who just heard about us somehow in the media and decided to put a benefit concert on. And so he contacted us and sent me 2 speakers. I'll pay for them to come over, and, you know, we'll be glad to have them, and all the proceeds from our benefit will go to the organization. And that was surprising. If any of you have ever been to Japan, it's pretty impressive. This is a nation that really, you know, a very old culture, and they have so many peace groups. Every town has peace museums, has peace organizations. Their children are raised with this concept of just, you know, personal violence against another person. An individual is extremely rare in Japan because they just are raised not, you know, not to have any thought of that. And they're extremely respectful. If you've ever been, you know, around Japanese people, they're very respectful and polite. But they're also very, very, you know, into no nukes and never war. I think that their government has actually passed a resolution. They will never, ever declare war on another country. Now, that's pretty significant. So they surprised me at how pervasive that is in their culture. And I was really impressed by that because, well, obviously they are the only nation that's, you know, suffered so much from a nuclear attack, but also they weren't like that before. You know, they were, before 1946, or 1945, they were very, very different.
Aggressive.
Yes, they were aggressive. And their culture has turned around quite a bit since then. And so, you know, when I saw that plaque that I showed, that didn't really even surprise me by that time because I had been traveling Japan for about a week. And, you know, it didn't surprise me. What surprised me was when I came back and saw how badly we were behaving. So, excuse me. Any other questions? Yeah?
I did go see the Eyes Wide Open when it came
Yeah.
to Phoenix, and I think that was kind of inspiring. I wish more
Where was it, in
non-choir
Phoenix?
people. Yeah, they had the visitors thing. I wish more of us non-choir people would go and visit things like that. I was wondering if you had, I'm sorry.
Anybody have a kid here?
I have a question.
Good.
Sorry. Always happens,
And we just,
but it always happens. Where was, in Phoenix, where was it?
It was at Encanto Park. I think it was a couple places actually, but I saw it at Encanto Park. It was just a little bit on the west side.
Well, Sean, I think it
Do
was
it,
at
thank
the
you.
David Thurian's gallery, Kim Lab.
Oh, yeah, I think it was.
Because they did it with another thing that we did for counter recruitment. We had an exhibit, and I think they put them together at Kim Lab.
But I was just wondering if you had like some advice or maybe some ideas of how to reach newer people who, you know, beyond this choir folk.
Yeah. Well, it's pretty tough because
I think you have a very unique background in which to approach people, whereas most of us, I think, don't. Because 9/11 sort of, I mean, you have an in for your unfortunate
I
circumstances.
know that. I understand exactly what you're saying. And as a, you know, an individual who doesn't have that connection, I understand it's hard. I think all I can say is, every opportunity you get, kind of leverage the discussion and ask people what they think. That tends to get them a little more receptive. You can also forward links to websites. A lot of people, you know, they don't want to hear you pontificate about your personal political beliefs. But if you send an email that has a link to a website, some people just can't resist, you know. I'm gonna look at that. Maybe for 5 seconds or 5 minutes they'll look at it. That may be all you need. That may be the best you can do. But it's something. You know, I figure that that one boy, that one 12-year-old boy, he made, you know, he was like my inspiration to keep going. Because I knew I'd touch one kid. And it may change the world, or it may change something, sometime. It may save a life. So, you can't really underestimate the power of some small action. And if you can connect to something personal in their lives, that's kind of the best way to talk to somebody. Now, I say that, and I don't always do that. I'm not always successful doing that. But I try. You know, I just try. And I also try to use that letter to the editor thing. In my state, it's a very red state, I was concerned that they would not print my letter to the editor if I came off as somebody very, you know, very left-wing. So I perfected the art of writing as if I was a right-winger and espousing a right-wing belief that we all agree on. You know, family values, for example. So something that pro-life, you know, you have people who can be sort of sucked in to thinking your way of thinking by just following the logic. And the logic at first, you know, the concept at first can seem very, very natural that everyone would agree to. Just then write your letter to the editor to follow that concept to a little bit different point of view. Maybe somebody by the end of reading your letter will go, oh my gosh. But at least you've gotten them to read it. So those are things you can try. And good luck. Good luck, because it's important that you do try. Oh, thank you. Gosh, I'm sorry about that.
I just want to encourage everybody, and I also want to say that, you know, obviously this conference, you know, for its many political attitudes and our political views and the workshops that happen, I mean, who knows what kinds of influences, but I just want to say, and, you know, I thank Beth and the organizers for the conference that was put on. Yesterday we had a workshop in the War Coalition, which is a coalition of peace groups here, and one of our veterans for peace showed the collateral murder videotape. It's a WikiLeaks where the soldiers shot down reporters and civilians. Anyway, the interesting thing, I'm trying to connect to what she's saying about the kind of personal connection. There was a young woman in the workshop whose brother has been in the military, and he has found himself questioning himself because he was given orders which he didn't know about, and he killed some civilians in a town that was thought to be having terrorists. And so what was really the agenda was that she was thinking about joining the military. So she started asking questions about, well, what's it like to be a woman in the military, and what are the opportunities, and how do men think? Anyway, to make a long story short, we had a veteran from New York phone in and talk about his experience. He was involved with that particular incident where they shot these people in Iraq, and he talked about his own personal situation. Anyway, at the end of the workshop, we asked her, because we were really concerned, because there's that one person who, you know, young person, and she says, I think I'm not going to go into the military. So it was like, oh my God, you know, this is what we all look for, right, on a daily basis, whether it's just a conversion or like one less person to go into the military. And so anyway, you know, those things don't come along very often, but it was really an incredible thing to see that. Now, who knows if she'll actually make that final decision, but she said, I think I'm not going to do that. So,
Yeah, you know, and you don't even have to seek a conversion or hope for conversion. You can just hope for somebody to listen to the other side. Because we are pretty divisive now. It's pretty shocking. And it's very difficult to expect, you know, people to come to your side. You may not even want them to come to your side, but you do want them to have an open mind, you know, more open mind. And most importantly, you know, I was in this workshop before I came here about the stones into schools, the one about the stones into schools. And we were talking about, you know, I'm sure all of you know about Greg Mortensen and his mission. He says education and ignorance, you know, education is the important thing. Ignorance is the enemy. And it is so true. It's like my friend who didn't know about Islam and was so shocked to find out they were peaceful. It's just ignorance. So if you can inform people, that's one little thing that you've done, right? Like I informed our policeman and my local vet. It's, you know, it's helpful. One more thing.
I don't have a question, I have just a comment. I want to thank you for your inspiring presentation.
Thank you.
And for the work of the group. And you know, a friend of mine, he's active in the Canadian peace movement. He says that the peace movement today is at the stage that the environmental movement was in the 70s.
Wow.
Being accused of many things, you know, being anti-patriotic, or being lunatics, or being marginals, or being naive, or whatever. And he says that hopefully it will take less than 30 years for the environmental movement to become mainstream. And I think that with the work that people like you are doing, it will take less than 30 years to achieve a more peaceful world and a culture of peace.
Boy, I sure hope so. Thank you for that. I sure hope you're right. I totally agree with that. And I think that, you know, you see a lot of nexus between the environmental movement and the peace movement. So hopefully we can have more of that. And I'm glad you said that, and I hope that's true.
I think that's a great way to let us thank Nancy.
Yes,
Thank you.